Welcome back to another episode of the Bigger Than Me podcast. Here is your host, Aaron Pete.
First, thank you to everyone who's been supporting this podcast over the years. This episode is such a highlight for me. I grew up watching Corner Gas, Hiccups, and this is just such a milestone for the podcast. It is my honor and privilege to announce my guest today, the great Brent Butt. So they say that life comes full circle. From growing up as a kid, having Corner Gas on in the background to help me fall asleep and have something positive to go to bed to being able to interview a legend, a fantastic Canadian creator. It's such a privilege to be sitting down with you today. Could you introduce yourself, Brent Brent Butt.
Well, Leroy's my middle name. I'm Brent Leroy Butt.
Perfect.
And I'm a greasy nightclub comedian and writer.
It's such a privilege. I know we have to start with Corner Gas. That's what everybody knows you for sure. Would you mind starting out with how that came about for you? My understanding is that this was an idea of you going back to your roots and thinking about what your path would have been had you stayed in rural Saskatchewan. Can you tell us about how that started?
Yeah, that's sort of the nuts and bolts of it. The idea was, what would my life be like if I hadn't decided to leave and become a comedian, to pursue a life in show business? And I thought, well, I hang out at the gas station with my buddies a lot. That's probably where I'd be. I'd be hanging out at the gas station. And I wrote it up as a treatment for a TV show because I often kind of purge ideas. If I get a good idea and it's sticking around in my head, I ultimately have to purge it. I have to get it down on paper. Or if it's a tune jingle in my head, I get it down, I record it on the guitar or whatever. If something's scouring around in my head a lot, I got to get it out. And that's kind of what it was with Corner Gas. I wrote it up as a 4-page treatment for a TV show. And then in typical Brent Butt fashion, I did nothing with it. Just because I didn't think anybody was going to be interested, right? And then a director friend of mine, David Story, said to me, let's go for coffee. He said, I was talking to the network. I pitched them some show ideas. They didn't like any of my show ideas, but they're interested in knowing if you have any show ideas. So do you have any show ideas? And I said, well, I wrote one about a gas station in Saskatchewan, but I can't imagine anybody would be interested in that. He said, well, tell me about it. I told him about it. He said he thought it seemed interesting, funny. He talked to the network about it, and they wanted to have a meeting, and it kind of went from there. So it was kind of like, the notion of being prepared for the opportunity when it comes around.
Was there anything therapeutic about going through that different trajectory of your life? We often kind of in our personal lives go like, had I gone this way, had I talked to that person, had I really pushed forward on this, maybe my life would be different. And it seems like this was really cool because you got to kind of play this out in your head and have some fun with where that trajectory would have taken you.
Yeah, and it really kind of dovetailed in a weird way because growing up in small town Saskatchewan, watching TV and, really wanting to make TV, be on TV, and then to sort of run this parallel life, like you said, of what my life would be like had I not pursued show business. And in that parallel life, I'm making a TV show. So it was kind of strangely meta in a way. But the thing, when you're in the throes of doing a TV show, there's so many things going on that at the time I was not very reflective. You just don't have an opportunity to be reflective. Yeah, I get picked up at 5 a.m. We would have 11, 12 hours on set, and then I'd be in the editing room till midnight and do it all again the next day. It was like literally, 17, 18-hour days when we were in production. So it's only sort of years afterwards that you get to look back and reflect.
I really love the fact that so many things came after that in the world of sitcom and humor, and it feels like you were really at the precipice in regards to that. And we think about how simple the storyline can be and how meaningful it can still be, despite the fact that it's not some dramatic, crazy thing happening. The day-to-day life is actually way more beautiful than I think we ever really give the space for, and I feel like you pulled that out really well, reminding us that there's beauty in the small moments.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I'm a big believer in a small premise. It's one of the things when I was first talking to the network about this show, I said, if you look historically at all, like what are all the high watermark TV shows? if you look at what their premise is, it's very, very basic. Like, what's the premise of The Honeymooners? What's the premise of I Love Lucy? What's the premise of, Seinfeld? These are all very simple premise shows. So what that affords is sort of an authenticity. People can immediately relate to it. If you're not fighting robots trying to save the world from being swallowed into another dimension, that can be hard for people to relate to. But if somebody, if you've misplaced your sunglasses, that's something everybody can relate to. You could do 22 minutes on that.
You also met your partner, Nancy, and connected and found love in this place. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So Corner Gas changed my life in a lot of ways. Nancy Robertson, who plays Wanda on the show. Wanda was, we were having a difficult time casting the part. I had initially wrote the part of Wanda to be a little bit older because the idea was she used to work for my father. Now she works for me after I've taken over the gas station. So I wrote her to be about 10 years older than me. But anyway, we saw a lot of really talented, great actors for the part, but nobody was quite nailing it. And then our casting director said to me one day, would you be open to looking younger for this role? And I said, yeah, like it doesn't have to be, a specific age. It's just the way I wrote it. And she said, because if you're willing to look a bit younger, who I think would be really funny in this role is Nancy Robertson. And I knew Nancy from just being, I knew who she was. She was a very high level comedic improviser with Vancouver Theatre Sports for many years. She's literally one of the best comedic improvisers ever. And that's not just me. You can talk to anybody who's played with her. So I said, yeah, Nancy Robertson is funny. Let's see if she'll read for this. And she did and nailed it. She was everybody's immediate favorite. And so she got the part. And yeah, just through spending time together, we ended up, we found that we had a lot in common, and we found that we were looking forward to spending time together. And so it went from there. Now we've been married, and we got married after we got married in 2005. So what was that? After the second season? After the first season?
Beautiful. And I had the interview with Lorne Cardinal, and he talked about the impact that he never expected from the show. He was being reached out to from people in the military saying they were in Afghanistan, using this as their comfort show, using this during rocket attacks and other challenges that were going on where they were. And once I posted that clip, I started getting inundated with people with similar stories where they were in the darkest hour, and this show really helped them. Would you mind sharing some of your own experiences on how this show has impacted others?
Yeah, I mean, it took us all by storm. We didn't, like, I kind of didn't think anybody was going to watch, never mind be impacted by it. So we all just sort of made this show. We sort of went into it thinking not a good likelihood that it's going to be a big audience. Canadian sitcoms historically hadn't done well in terms of big audiences. And this was sort of an odd premise, gas station in Saskatchewan. So who's going to watch? So we made a show that we liked, that we felt we could be proud of. And I think that resonated with people. And there was people took a lot of comfort from the show. We've often had people reach out saying how, watching the show with their parent who was going through an illness and ultimately dying from the illness. And that half hour every week, there was the one moment where they would see their sick relative laugh or have some comfort. We heard countless stories like that where people gravitated to the show as sort of a respite, sort of a, they liked it, they thought it was funny, but they took comfort in it. And the fact that, one of the things we heard a lot was people saying it's the only show that we all want to watch together. Like the teenage kids, the parents, the grandparents are all, would be like, hey, is Corner Gas on? It's time to sit down and watch Corner Gas. And I think there aren't a lot of shows that sort of stitch across all demographics like that. And for whatever reason, people, I think they looked at Corner Gas and they looked at it as a show that wasn't trying to be something it wasn't. We just said, this is what this show is, and this is what we're going to do. And as a result, people felt like they weren't being sold something, and they sat down and and just enjoyed it. And yeah, it's something I take a great pride in, the fact that it sort of brought families together.
I certainly feel the same way. With the live show, you had so many opportunities to collaborate, and that seems like it was a cornerstone. Regularly, episodes would have prime ministers, individuals of great influence, important Canadian figures, and we also don't see that very often, where we're able to highlight and bring some people and remind you of other great Canadian talent. Was there a standout moment for the live show that stood out to you where you were like, how are we doing this? How did this come up?
Yeah, I mean, there were a number of them. Like when we had Daryl Sittler on, suddenly we had, there were a lot of dudes that I'd never seen before who were standing there with a broom, like, yeah, I work here. There were a lot of guys coming down to see Daryl Sittler. But, Tragically Hip, when we had Tragically Hip on to do their cameo, we were shooting them first thing in the morning. They were first seen up. And, so the cameras rolled at maybe 7:30, something like that. And they were sort of warming up before we started shooting. And, myself and Nancy and Fred, we were, and the crew were like, we're having a private concert by the Tragically Hip at 7:30 in the morning, and there's like, it's just for us. And they were just banging it out. And, yeah, it was a very surreal moment. That was another day where we had, there was 800 crew members that we had never seen before swirling around the set. I don't know who was running security that day, but a lot of people were coming through, a lot of friends and family coming through on Tragically Hip Day.
So it becomes a movie, it becomes an animated series. It obviously takes off and continues to grow, but it's now come to a close. I'm just curious about what it's like to have gone through those different periods, those different timelines of the movie and the animated series. What were some standout moments from that?
Oh, I mean, standout moments. There's so many. I mean, just the fact that we got to do this at all was amazing, and then the fact that it connected with people and we got to do it for multiple years, and Corner Gas became a thing that I was working on for, I thought we were going to do 13 episodes. We ended up doing 17 years of banging out Corner Gas stories. And yeah, so it was just, something that we never thought was ever going to, like when people say, were you surprised at the success of Corner Gas? Like, I can't articulate how out of left field it was. Like, being surprised doesn't quite cut it. Like, I really thought we were going to do 13 episodes and then I would just go back to doing nothing but stand up, So this has been, like, I can't overstate what a blessing this run has been. Everything that I got out of it, all the enjoyment. I got a wife out of the deal. And it sort of catapulted me from playing clubs to playing theaters when I go on the road doing stand up. And yeah, I mean, it's just changed my life in 100,000 ways at least.
Do you feel like there's a lesson to be learned that it's not always what you expect? It's not always the way that you see it. It's sometimes an idea that catches you off left field that you're not prepared for, but you have to follow through with it. You have to chase it. Once it comes knocking, you have to follow through on those opportunities when they come up.
Well, if it feels right, like, an opportunity doesn't automatically, it shouldn't automatically be pursued. It does have to feel right. It has to, and I want to be clear, like on every front, Corner Gas felt right to me. Like, I wanted to do this show. I knew it could be funny. I didn't know if people would respond, but I knew that it could be funny, and I knew we could make a good show. And so it was, it was diving into the opportunity, but it's more about being prepared for when your opportunity comes along. Like, I've written a lot of things, just on my own time, because I wanted to get it on paper and wanted to see if it was funny or wanted to see if it was a good story. And doing the work without the reward, like doing the work not for the money, really puts you in good stead for when, if a door opens and somebody says, "Hey, I'm looking to buy something. You got anything?" you can say, yeah, I got quite a lot actually. If you, I've been working really hard here in the dark. And so being prepared for the opportunity when it comes along, it's like being a backup goalie. Odds are slim that you're going to be playing tonight, but you work out just as hard as everybody else because you have to be ready when your opportunity comes.
You've somewhat described that when you're in the thick of it, when you're grinding, you're not able to zoom out and look back on it and understand how everything kind of tied together just so, and all the work going into it. You don't get to have that moment of self-reflection and kind of see what you're creating. It's come to a close now. How do you feel looking back on it? Is the chapter closed? Is the book closed on this? And how is that to process?
Yeah, I feel like it's all closed now. I feel like we've already had so much more than we ever anticipated. It's like, you think you're going to get a bowl of soup and you end up with this buffet that goes on and on, all you can eat forever, for like 17 years. So there's no squawking at the end of it when the buffet closes down. You're like, man, I just thought I was going to have a bowl of soup. So I certainly feel like we didn't get short sheeted. I certainly feel like we didn't short sheet anybody. I love the fact that people wish it was still going because that's just a good feeling. That makes you think that people, that you did something that people didn't want to end. And I've been on the other side of that. There are a lot of times, TV shows that I just wanted to go on forever and was sad to see go. But everything's got to come to an end. That's just the way the world works, right? And so I certainly have no regrets about the way Corner Gas all came together and the way it wrapped up. And coming back and being able to do this animated run for 4 seasons was really such a nice way to get back together with everybody, with the cast again, in sort of a limited. We didn't have to put the rest of our lives on hold and move to Saskatchewan for 4 months of the year. We were all able to live our lives, but come together on a Tuesday into a studio and record and laugh and have a lot of fun for a day's work, And it was such a great treat to be able to close things off doing that. We never thought that was going to happen. I always thought the movie was going to be the cherry on top, but the response to the movie was just so huge that it made the network say, you want to do some more? And so we went the animation route. So, just looking back on it, like I said before, there's so many blessings that I took from this show, and I am and will forever be grateful to that opportunity.
On that last note, you just sort of made a comment about being able to write and write freely. I'm just curious, with your mind, I know you enjoy comics, I know you enjoy that level of humor. Was it nice to be able to kind of let out some unique ideas and get really creative for that period and go in different directions with the animated series?
Yeah, very much so. There were often times when we were like, it was such a natural transition because in the live action show, we had this sort of built-in device where we could pop out of reality and see what somebody was thinking. And that allowed us to shoot some jokes that would otherwise have sort of fractured our reality, which I always wanted to. This show has to be grounded and feel real in ways. But we were coming up with really funny jokes that would, if we did them, would fracture our reality. So we ended up coming up with that device of popping out to, initially it was going to be popping out to Brent's happy place, but we started using it for, we could see inside anybody's head, quick little jokes. But the problem is sometimes, it's a quick little bit, and the cost to shooting a really big thing for a short amount of screen time is sort of cost prohibitive sometimes. But once we were animating, we could get away with a little more because we're just drawing it. We could do things that were sort of too big for us to do in live action. We could do it because we were drawing it. So yeah, it really allowed us to get a little creative and open up our minds.
When you have something that blows up so big and has such an impact on people, that's what you become known for. Being typecast as that person and that version can be a challenge for individuals. And it doesn't mean that you're not grateful for the incredible opportunities and the benefits people have had with that, but you're a dynamic person with different interests and different understandings. You start to look at creating the psychological thriller Huge, which is fantastic. But I'm just curious as to what that process was like to move towards something where you know that some of your audience is expecting what they've always gotten, and then you're moving in this new direction. Was that a challenge at all? Was it a challenge to reflect on that?
I knew it was going to be, I knew that what I was writing was very different from anything anybody had seen me write before, because it's not a comedy. For those who don't know, Huge is not a comedy. It's about comedy, but it's a dark psychological thriller, and it gets quite dark and quite violent and very gritty, and it's kind of a scary book, which is like what I like to read. And I knew I was going to write this story. It had percolated in my head for a long time, and I knew I wanted to write a novel at some point. And so, when the world kind of shut down for a while, I thought, well, now's, there's no excuse now if I don't start writing this novel now. And this idea that I'd had was the one that I decided to write about. But I knew I was just going to do it. So it wasn't like, well, should I do this? Because people might not respond to it if they expect me to be, sort of lighthearted, friendly comedy guy. This is very different. It wasn't like that. It was like, well, so I wasn't deciding whether to do it or not based on that. I knew I was doing it. And then it was just a secondary thought. It's like, yeah, I wonder if anybody's going to read this or respond to it because it's very different. But that's not the type of thing that ever, I don't sort of choose my projects based on what I think people are going to watch. Like Corner Gas is the perfect example. We went into this not thinking anybody was going to watch. You do it because it feels right, and it's creatively it's good, and you enjoy it. And I just got to get stuff out of my head. I just got to do what I'm going to do, and I cross my fingers, and I want people to like it, and I hope they like it, but I don't do it trying to make people like it. I don't do things trying to make people like it. Or, I do it because I want to do it. And, luckily, just sort of the way my head works, a lot of what I produce, is pretty accessible to people. May or may not be your cup of tea, but it's not, people aren't running away screaming or being, hating me for being offensive or something like that. But that's just the way my head works. But, Huge is very different. Huge is, like I said, it's dark, and it goes to some scary places. But it's basically, in some ways, I just look at it as it's just sort of it's a monster story. So it's going to be scary.
You've mentioned this a few times. It comes in your head and you have to get it down. And my fear is that other people don't do that. Other people might have great inspiration. They might have a great idea, but they never get around to following through on it. They don't pursue it. They don't push forward on it. What advice do you have for other people who might have ideas in their head and they're not following through on it? They're not writing it down. They're not putting it into the world. They're not kind of following that step. You're like, once I have it, I need to put it down. Even if it doesn't go anywhere, I need to get it down and see if it's something.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always, I'm sort of hesitant to give people advice because there's so many variables, so many factors in everybody's situation that it's difficult to be, from the outside going, here's what you need to do. This is how you do it.
Yeah.
Everybody is different. So for me, I get it down because I have to. It's not because I feel like, I should. I don't want to let this idea go away. It's not like I'm doing it because I feel I should or it's pragmatic. I do it because I will go mad if I don't, right? I've had days where I can't think of anything else except some stupid scene in my head. And if I don't get it down, I'm not going to be able to drive the car today because it's all I can think about. Or a tune just swirling and swirling in my head. I remember one time I was haunted by, for whatever reason, I still don't know where this came from, a picture. It was a blue apple on an orange background. And so it was in my head for about 4 or 5 days nonstop. And I finally just went and bought a canvas and I painted a blue apple on an orange background. I had no idea where that painting is, but then it was out of my head. So for me, I just do it because I have to. But I think for a lot of people like the idea of sitting down and writing something. But just from talking to people, I've sort of learned that a lot of people are, the thing that stops a lot of people is that they're afraid what they're going to put down isn't very good. And that's a scary thing for people, I think. I think they think, well, maybe I have a story, or maybe I have a script, or a book, a play, a song, and it's good in their head. And they're afraid if they write it down, it's going to not be good. That fear of realizing that what I thought was good in my head is not good here stops a lot of people. So if you can get past that and just accept the fact that, the first time you write something down is probably going to be garbage. I mean, it is for everybody. A lot of your top writers, that they write something down so they can fix it. That's really what it is. You can't edit a blank page. So you write something down, you do the best you can with it, but don't worry about how good it is, because you can make it good later. That's the idea behind it. I sort of live by the idea that the first draft, whatever you're doing, the first draft is me telling myself the story. Nobody's going to see it. Nobody else is going to, nobody's going to read it. Nobody's going to hear it. This is me telling me the story. And then I get to listen to that story and go, I don't think that's anything. Or maybe I'll go, that could be something. It's kind of garbage right now, but I see where that could be something. If we knock a couple of the knobs off it, file this part down, move this over here, move here, and make this person old instead of young, now we maybe got something. Now you got a second draft, and you look at it and you go, well, that's a long way from being good, but it's much better than it was. So what if this old guy was old twins, whatever it is. The idea, I think a lot of people are frozen at the idea of what I put down might not be very good. Well, it's just going to be not very good. That's why when you draw something, you do it with the pencil first, because you're going to have to probably erase a lot.
Right.
So you do the pencil line. Like the best artists in the world, people working for Marvel, do pencil first, right? Figure it out. You go, oh, that guy's head's way too big there. You got to draw it down. So don't worry about making something good right away. Just make something. And odds are you can make it good. You can at least make it better. So don't let that stop you.
Do you also feel like there's a danger in falling in love with your first idea? It seems like you were really flexible throughout all of this to make minor modifications, to change this where it needed to be changed, and not fall in love with this was the initial presupposition of the idea and it needs to stay that, and any deviation is a problem. It seems like you've been open to the idea of being flexible and dynamic with the idea and making sure that it still holds true, but that it doesn't need to be exactly what you wrote down the first time.
Yeah, I mean, you sort of have to trust your instincts. I mean, so for me, my instincts, my history has been, well, you've been wrong a lot. So there's a chance you might be wrong here again. It's not like up to the current point in my life, I've never made a damn mistake, or I've never been wrong about anything. So if somebody says, what I think might make this better, I'm all ears. I'm open to it. Especially if it's somebody who's, understands the business or understands the industry that you're working in. But even if it's not, sometimes you get a better objectivity from somebody outside whatever given genre you're working in, right? Just because they're not tainted by it. But I'm always open to that. And, I come from a collaborative, I'm the youngest of 7 kids. There were 9 of us living in the house, and we were always up in each other's business all the time. You can't, how are you going to not be? And so we lived sort of a very collaborative life. And even though I got into stand-up, which is a solo pursuit, you sort of surround yourself with these other like-minded misfits, and you share that, and you bounce ideas off each other. And then when you get into writing TV, it's such a collaborative, it's such a team sport, TV production, film production. Everybody's got to be working together. And so I don't know. I'm open to ideas. I'm open to the notion that I may be wrong. But at the same time, I do have a level of confidence in that voice in my head that says, no, they're wrong about this. You should stick to your guns. An example that comes to mind was, especially in the first little while, the first first season when we were putting it together, the network was very concerned that the show was too slow and quiet. It's going to drag down, And I said, this is a show about a gas station in Saskatchewan. That's what you bought. It's not high-paced thrill a minute, And I think people are going to respond to that. In a loud, crazy world where there's nothing but explosions and monster fights, a big blue sky and a few people sitting on stools cracking jokes to each other, that might appeal to people. And I just felt that it needed to have a certain pace. And if that pace was slow, I remember saying to one of the network executives, I said, the answer to all the world's problems is not floor it. Put your foot to the floor. That could often be problematic. Sometimes the answer is taking your foot off the gas a little.
Fantastic advice, and I think in a time like now is very useful for people to keep that in their minds. What was the process of writing the book? Did you have a layout of how it was going to go, like the storyline, or while you're writing, you're sort of putting things together and seeing where the story is about to take you?
It's a bit of both. So I sit down with a bit of a structure, a bit of a framework, because I like to know where I'm writing to. I like to know the point that I'm writing to. So plan plot points, but you also go into that knowing that odds are I'm going to come up with better ideas through the process of writing than I could just sitting here pulling ideas out of the air. I often say I have a hard time writing outside of writing. Like, for me to write good, I have to be writing. Some people are able to go for a walk and solve a plot point. I can't do that. And I've tried. Things will come to me now and then, but for the most part, and maybe it's just because I'm scattered. I'm a bit of a scatterbrain. I really am. I'm all over the map. I have, thinking of a million things at once. But when I start writing, I feel like I'm just thinking about this, and things come to me in a way that they wouldn't otherwise. So I create the framework and the structure. But it's pretty, I usually go into it with like 7 points in mind. And I know going in, I accept that I'm probably going to, those might change because I'm going to come up with better ideas as we go through this. And sometimes just to keep the train moving, because I'm a big believer in getting to the end and then going back and fixing. You just want to keep moving forward and get finished something. So I will make notes, or sometimes even if I'm writing on my laptop, I'll write a sentence and I know that I'll come up with a better idea for where this scene should be going. I'll just write that in. I'll say, change what you just wrote so that it's, whatever my new idea is. And I'll highlight that in red, and then I'll just keep going. Going from that point in the story. So I try not to go back, and it's very counterproductive for me to go back. You end up, you're like, wow, I've been working for 6 months. I'm still on page 15. It's quite a good 15 pages, but this is where I was 6 months ago. I mean, I have a actual manual typewriter. I'll sometimes write a scene. If I don't know what the problem of the scene is, or what the scene needs to be, I'll actually write it on my mechanical typewriter, because it's so difficult. You can't go back and delete. You just got to keep plowing forward. And the process of moving forward is usually you will find that nugget somewhere in there.
One of your gifts throughout your whole career has always been attention to detail, really allowing the reader or the listener or the viewer to really understand exactly what's going on. Particularly with the book Huge, I was being able to see exactly when you go into the hotel room, that whiff of bleach. Like, those attention to detail moments are so fascinating to me. Where do you think that comes from for you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm fascinated by it too, like you. And so that's what I write, because, as I'm sort of writing this scenario, and I'm a big overwriter. I write a lot more than is required, and then you sort of edit the chunks away. But It's in the writing of those details and overwriting some of those things that you find neat little moments. And so yeah, I just think, the devil is in the details, right? That's where you got to get in and muck around. That's where you make it good. And people often overlook details, little, I think in a comedy background, people really underestimate how delicate comedy is and how tiny little microscopic changes to things can make a huge difference. They can make the difference between a big laugh or like absolute crickets in a joke. Whether you might, a joke might bomb because the punchline has the word Wednesday in it, and you change it to Tuesday and it gets a big laugh. It can be little things like that. And so I sort of come from that background, that place. But even as a kid, when I was drawing, I loved the little details. I love wrinkles in clothes. I love like crow's feet drawing, like little details. There's something about that. My mind feels comfortable exploring the nooks and crannies, little details of things. And it shows up in my writing.
I've heard it said that the artist brings back things into the forefront of your mind that as a child you would have seen, but when you get older, it's just a flower, it's just a tree, who cares? And the artist does a terrific job of bringing that back to the forefront and allowing you to see the beauty in a clean hotel room or other things.
I like that idea. I've never heard that, but I like that. I think it's accurate. And I know that, I think a big part of any success that I've had is the fact that I only grew up so much. There's a big part of me that is a 6-year-old kid, going down with, getting $1 from my dad on Saturday and going and getting a Spider-Man comic book and a bottle of Coke, and then trying to figure out where to spend that other 50 cents on some sort of gizmo that would help me fight crime. I'm not so far from that kid. I weigh quite a bit more, but aside from that, there's a good chunk of me that is still that kid. Saturday, I'll get up and have a bowl of cereal and put a Spider-Man cartoon on YouTube and watch it. I'm in many ways, I'm still that kid. I just have sort of a better grasp of the language now. And, I got a bit more money in my jeans, but I'm drawn to a lot of the same things. I mean, I like cigars now more than I would have when I was 6. Cigars and whiskey are more a now thing, but yeah. Spider-Man and cereal is still in there.
Hopefully not mixing the two at the same time, right?
Yeah. Get a nice glass of milk and a cigar. Who doesn't love it?
The other interesting piece about the book is, as well, it's not a true story, but the brilliance of it is that you do tie in so many realities of the comedy world and the challenges comics face. Would you mind talking about that?
Yeah, it was an attractive idea to me to really sort of peel back the curtain a little bit for people who don't know what it's like to be a comedian on the road, because it is certainly, the farthest thing away from glamour that you could get. And it's really like living hand to mouth, deciding what you can and can't afford to eat, or whether you can eat, and hoping you don't have to share a hotel room with some lunatic that you just met. It's not a lot of glamour, but on the other side of it, you're really pursuing a dream, and it's something, one of the main characters in the book talks about, or, he thinks about it, that this is a tangible blessing. Like every day, all these little things that you get to go through, that you have to go through, is a tangible reminder that you, unlike a lot of people, are in the middle of pursuing a dream. A lot of people have dreams and they're not in a position to dive in and go chase it. And if you get the opportunity, if you're able to chase your dreams, that's a blessing. So I wanted to sort of, just shine a light a little bit on what it's like, and just the things that people don't know about. When you go into a room as a comedian, you go into, I'm going to be playing this pub tonight, and you walk in, you look around, and you see what's going to be problematic. The TVs are on. Are they playing pool? Are they taking a cover at the door? You start assessing, and you start thinking, okay, how can I tweak? There's some problems here. Can I get management to change this or this before the show starts in 15 minutes? So these are things you think about. And I just wanted to make people aware of it. And it's a nice bit of feedback that I've had from people who've read the book, is saying, wow, I really learned a lot about being a comedian.
Yeah, I think it's really important because it's in some ways the hardest job, because there's a joke in the book about how, like, is there a school for this? And there really isn't, because it's your style, it's your story, it's your journey. But one of the things you highlight is how all of the different characters find their journey in. And some go through adversity in their life. Some, it's like losing someone that really makes them wake up to the idea that they need to go get after this and that this is what they need to follow through on. And I thought there was a beauty to that, because it's not always the good things that are happening in your life that cause you to go chase your dream. Sometimes it's the hardest things that you've been through.
Yeah, I think we're all made up of those moments in our lives, you know, the good and the bad and the hard and the happy. They all sort of form who we are. And yeah, I mean, at its essence, you know, I never write with a theme in mind, but I always recognize a theme as I'm writing. And I realized that with Huge, it's really a story about loss. The three main characters have each suffered a great loss, and they're each changed by it in different ways. You know, with one, it haunts them. With the other, it drives them, and the other sort of gets turned into a monster. But these branches of their life, the paths of their life, are all sort of stemmed off a moment of great loss for each of them. And you know, we all go through these big losses in our life, and we're all shaped by it in one way or another.
Beautiful comments. You described one of the characters, Dale, and his comedic style. Can you describe yours to us?
Mine's just very conversational. I think I'm at my best when I'm rambling, and that's not to say I don't put time into crafting the joke, but you know, I'm very conversational. I think my best jokes don't sound like jokes; they sound like a guy telling you sort of a story, and that developed naturally. And I think comedy's at its best when it's, well, like anything, it goes back to authenticity. Like when I first started doing stand-up for a while, I started doing a character for a while, a really super nervous guy, and it was kind of a fun character to do. And it got big response from the crowd, because it's like really nervous character. A lot of the jokes would come from him being very scared and screwing up and saying the wrong thing, and that's sort of what it was like, character comedy kind of. And it was doing well, but what I found was I wasn't having fun doing it, because it was this other guy getting the laughs. You know, this character was getting all the laughs. I want to get the laughs. Whatever my psychosis is, whatever itch I need to scratch in there, I want to get the laughs. So I went back to just being myself, and it was much more fulfilling. And I think comedy at its best is when it's authentic, when it's truest to what the speaker is like. I always say that I'm most myself when I'm doing stand-up. That's the most real version of me you're going to see. Or sitting on the sofa watching Miss Marple with my wife. That's also very much who I am.
I have to ask about one of the lines. I think it's very deep. Teens are the true artists in cruelty, equally adept at splashing paint in wide, garnished strokes, as they are at applying microscopic subtleties that stain the psyche on a strictly subconscious level. It was one line I just couldn't get out of my head, and I thought it was incredibly deep.
Yeah, I mean, I think teens do have a peculiar gift for cruelty, partly because it's you know, they're in the sweet spot where they're good with the language, they can see things and spot things, but they're often, you know, they haven't gone through things to sort of give them as much empathy as an older person might have. And so they're in this dangerous zone where they have a certain amount of skills and a certain lack of wisdom. And that's it. That's dangerous, you know? And so, yeah, I find that teens do have a particular gift for cruelty. I think anybody who's gone through school knows that or has seen it, right? Like how many, you know, you see kids get bullied in the playground, you know, grade 1 or 2 or whatever. And you know, it can carry on through college, and you know, your whole life you're going to encounter bullies. But that window, that sort of junior high school window, wow, people can be needlessly cruel in that window of time.
Can you talk about the antagonist in the book? I thought you did a brilliant job of making a real monster, and
Thank you.
one that terrifies you as you're reading and you're wondering what's going to happen next, and the consequences, and is this going to go as far as I think it is? What was that process like?
Yeah, it was. I find Hobie to be a very interesting character. I really enjoyed writing Hobie because he's a lot of things. And principally, like you said, like certainly when you first get to know Hobie, he's enormous. He's said to be in the book at least 6'5", probably more. Very muscled. He's clearly a dangerous. He has the potential. He has the capacity for, he would be too much of a handful for almost anybody in a physical situation. And then as Dale and Rin spend time with him on the road, and they start to see that he's maybe not wired up right, that, there are some wires touching that shouldn't be touching in there. And then it becomes that situation of you're sort of, how nervous are you? You're in a van with a gorilla, and they're kind of quiet right now. But if they want to reach across and strangle me or bite my face, it could happen. And there's not a lot I could do about it. It's it's a kind of a scary situation. And, I've been, and all comedians have been on the road with somebody where you're like, this person does not think right. And there are a lot of places to hide my body out here. I wonder how this is going to go. And that's kind of what I wanted to capture with this, is just that sort of dread, the dread of being with somebody that if this goes sideways, it's like having a killer dog on the seat beside you. If this dog decides to go haywire, what's going to happen? And I feel like it could happen at any moment. That's sort of what Hobie's like. It feels like this guy could just go off at any second, and you're wondering how that's going to play out. There's a lot of dread with Hobie.
It seems like we're in a time where comfort is the top commodity. When we're ordering off of Amazon, we get things so simply. Life has become a lot easier for us, but it's oftentimes in the darkest moments that we really figure out who we are, what our philosophy is, and what our values are. That was also a standout point. It's one of my favorite things about horrors and psychological thrillers, is that in those darkest moments, people get to redefine who they are, and they get to see who they truly are. And when I was a kid, a subway in Chilliwack was getting robbed, and I went after the person, chased after them, tried to get their license plate, called 911, tried to figure out what was going on. And in that moment, I defined myself as the person who does something when things go wrong. When a problem arises, I'm going to step in. And I felt like the characters did a great job of you developing them to be the people who look inwards to try and figure out who they are in the darkest moments.
Yeah, I think we're often defined by how we respond to adversity, right? How do you respond when you get knocked down? It's easy to be a certain person when everything's going your way. But conversely, I think too, it's sort of like if you have it too easy, too good, that can kind of reveal who you are too, I think maybe it lies in those extremes: extreme adversity or extreme comfort and luxury. How do you respond in those moments? Like we were talking about, like in moments of adversity, how we respond, that tells us a lot about ourselves. But also, like, if you have, you hear stories about people who are like fantastically wealthy and powerful and famous, and, people, anything they want, it's going to go their way. There are people like that you hear are incredibly nice and generous and kind and not that different from who they were when they were struggling. And then you hear stories about people who they take this opportunity of a position of power to be complete a-holes. So I think, when everything is going your way, I think that reveals a lot about you too. Are you good to people when you don't have to be? I think that tells a lot about somebody.
That's a really good point. Can you tell us about when the book is releasing, what people can expect, and where they can find it?
It's publishing October 3rd. It's going to be in stores October 3rd across Canada and the US, wherever you find your books. It's available for pre-sale now. Wherever you would get your books. If you have a favorite bookstore or if you go online to buy your books, it's available wherever books are sold. It's starting October 3rd. And the response has been very gratifying so far. People seem to really like the book, and people seem to be very surprised at what I've written here because it's very different.
Is there any nerves that go into it? Any sweaty palms as we get closer to that release date? How do you process a big event like this?
Yeah, there's definitely sweaty palms, and I don't. This is something new to me, and I don't know what's going to happen. But I just wrote about this on my Substack today. How I love diving into new things that I don't know much about. I love cannonballing into a different situation. And, as long as there's no physical harm in the way, I'm not like a paratrooper going to jump in behind enemy lines. But if it's something like Corner Gas, I didn't know about creating a TV series. I had been involved in making TV, but to executive produce a TV series was a completely different animal. And you dive in and you learn as you go and you teach as you go. And that's such a sweet spot. So you're asking questions and getting answers, and people are asking you and you're giving answers. It's this great human moment of learning and teaching at the same time. And that's how I look at any new situation, which this is.
I grew up watching your show. I grew up looking up to you. I've learned so much through your journey of highlighting individuals who are making a difference, and you've done such a great job of reminding us to look at the small moments, see humor in it, and make sure that we're being the best people we can be. And I think you're just such a positive influence for people, and I think I can't thank you enough for doing this. You've been a highlight of doing this podcast. I can't appreciate you.
Shut up, stupid. How about that? Put a little twist at the end there. Well, thank you. Thanks for all that. Very kind words. I appreciate it very much.
October 3rd, I think people should absolutely read it. We've got a dog cameo going on in the background for people who are just listening. You have a beautiful background. Thank you for doing this. How can people follow along with your journey? What is your Substack, your Twitter, your Instagram?
Yeah, you can find me, Brent Butt, on Substack, substack.com, to search my name. Or on Instagram is the best place, probably, at Brent Butt.
Thank you again for doing this.
My pleasure.